All right, the last thing I want to talk about in formatting tables before we try building our own is the cell width. Each of these cells uses only as much room as the largest cell in that column. So if you look at my books table, the largest title in that table sets the width of column one. The maximum width of the number of pages, or the header sometimes, in that case pages is probably wider than the number, sets the width of the table. So this column header sets the width of that table. But what if you want a little more control over that? Then you can set the width using styles of a particular cell. Okay. So where I normally put that is in a cell that's in the first row. So if I want my width of this cell to be a little wider still, I can put a width in there and say that the width is 75%. Seventy-five percent of what? 75% of the table. Now in this case, that doesn't make a lot of sense because the table doesn't have a width. The table width is generic. But if I set the width of the table back to 80%, now I get a table that's 85%, and this is 3/4 of what's left over. If you look at it, it looks about right. And as I make things bigger, the tables adjust. You can also put a fixed size in here. So if I, for some reason, want to set the width, where to go? The TH. The width to a certain number of pixels. And sometimes you just eyeball it. Say that looks pretty good. If I make it too small, by the way, it will not shrink anymore. It might, hang on a second, because of the wrapping, it might still shrink. I don't want the width of this cell to be any wider, that's what we're saying here, any wider than 100 pixels. It might get smaller than that. We saw what happened to my column header when I shrunk stuff. Now it's 100 pixels. It will not get any wider than that. If I set it to 300, it will not get any wider, but it might get smaller. This takes a little getting used to. Now it's 500. It might, if I get down here, it gets smaller than 500. But it'll never be any wider than 500. Notice at some point column 2 starts stretching and 1 gets stuck, but then it can get smaller. So what you're really setting when you set the width of a cell is its maximum width. And I believe there's also a min width saying do not let this get any smaller than 100 pixels. I haven't messed with that too much. What I normally do with my tables is try to come up with a decent size, fixed size, for the leftmost cells, the leftmost columns. Now, notice I only had to set at the top. Every cell inside then adopts that width. There are exceptions to that. What if the text inside is bigger? Then it wraps. Okay. I set the cell widths for these if I want my table widths to be pretty fixed. But one of the things my notes recommends is that you should always have, if your table is proportionally spaced, you should always have one column that doesn't designate a width and just said let that be the flex column, that one that bends and stretches and gets as big as it needs to be. So if I had a bunch of stuff here like name and age and description, I would set the name and the age columns to a certain width so that they're always pretty much the same, and then let the description column flex with the size of the page. At least one. When we started out, everything was flexing, and that may be okay. But in the next example that I'm going to build, I'm going to want each of the columns to be the same size regardless of how big they want to be. I don't want them flexing. The other alternative is to have a table that's completely fixed. Table width of 200, cell 50, 50, 100. Fits exactly. Table will not shrink less than the size that you make it. This is why page layout was so fun with tables. Because what happens when you start shrinking and moving the size of the page, and the table has to adapt to it. It's very difficult to do well, versus our flowing text stuff that we've got with divs and floats and everything else, that they adjust much better. Okay. Leave one column with an undesignated width. It's a good idea if you can pull it off. All right, so here's what I want to create. So let's close this one and create a new one using my trusty dusty macro. Save that onto the desktop as schedule.html. And now, as I mentioned before, I want a plan. Well, I've got a plan. It's already laid out here. And what I'm going to need to do, and what we haven't learned how to do yet, is the spanning of rows and columns. The merging is what it's called in Word. Okay. In HTML, it's called a span. We haven't figured out how to do that. In order to build this table, the first thing I need to know is how many columns do I need? This looks like one column. Well, it is, but I need to know how many columns maximum are there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns. Doesn't hurt to know how many rows. 1, 2, 3, whoops. Here's where every row is designated. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows. Duh, that's what it says on here. Okay, so over here what I want to do is create a table that is 7 cells by 7 rows, and I think I want to bring in that last file again because I'm going to steal some of my table styles. Okay, so there's my table, and I'm going to steal this table and the TDs so I get some nice borders, and I don't know that I need that bottom, so I'll just copy this. Actually, I'm going to need the whole style tag. Copy that over to here, take out what I don't want. I want the collapse, I want the margin auto, width of 80%, might not be a bad idea, but I don't need the bigger font size. Padding is okay, I don't need the bottom style. So we'll go with that, and in here I'm going to build my table. I need 7 rows of 7 columns, so I'm going to create a row. And for each row I'm going to create a TD, and I think I can squeeze all this into one. Will the first one be a header? We'll figure that out later. And I don't know, I don't want anything inside here. But let me show you what happens if I don't put non-breaking spaces in there. I have a border style, okay, and I want 7 cells. So that's one row with 7 cells. I've saved it. Here's the schedule file. Let's display that. Well, it worked better than I thought it was going to. Maybe they've changed that lately. So that worked pretty good, right? Got my blue cells. I don't know if I want blue. What happens if you don't designate a color? Probably get black. So that worked pretty good. Maybe we don't need those non-breaking spaces. Still seems to be working. So I'm going to go without them, and then maybe somewhere in this recording we'll figure out why I used to put them in. I need 7 of these rows. Copy. So now I'm going to put comments on my rows. The first one is kind of the title row. And the next one is going to be days of the week. And then 9, 10, 11, 12, and 1. Just so when I'm looking for them, I can find them a little bit easier. This is a requirement when you do your homework assignments, is you mark these a little bit so I can find them when I'm grading. And that also lets me know I got the right number of rows, right? So there we're good. See if that does anything to my table. Looks good. So I've got the general outline of this table. Add beginning comments to each row. Merge all the cells in the first row. How do I merge cells? By putting in a column span. And notice this is an attribute. It is not a style. We are not changing the style of this row or these cells. We're changing an attribute of it. So this is not in a style tag. It's an attribute. There's a col span and there is a row span. Column spans allow you to span multiple columns, meaning put these columns together. Merge these cells. So here's my title row, and my title is supposed to say, this is supposed to be one big huge cell, and then inside is supposed to say Volker's schedule, new line, fall 2014. So in here, I want the Volker's schedule, break, fall 2014. Now I could easily put that on multiple lines, indent differently, probably should do it. You indent, and then a break to show that's on a new line, and then the end tag lined up with its buddy. Notice TDs, if it don't fit on one line, then I wrap them in my indent to make them much more readable. That's all well and good. When I put it over here, it fits, but I want it to go across all the cells. In here, and so again, this is an attribute, it is not a style, so it can't be done externally. I say I want a column span of how many do I want to absorb? Well, there's a total of 7, so I'm pretty sure that if I want this to span 7 columns, I have to say column span equals 7. And it will span all of those columns. I don't think there's quotes around that. And I don't have any examples. So we'll have to try it. Save it, go. It did it, right? It did it. But look what else it did. I said, give me one big, huge 7 spanning column cell, and then give me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more. If I really want this to work, this says span to 7 columns, so these just go away. Now you could remove them, or another option, and you decide which one you prefer, is to comment them out, to say these have been absorbed by somebody else. So when you span, I usually lay out my table, but when you span, you then have to remove the cells that have been spanned. And that's not bad when you're doing columns, but it gets pretty darn ugly when you're doing row spans. Now while I'm at it, let's just tweak this. Looks like the font is pretty much the same as the rest of the table. So all I really want to do in that header row is, well, what if I make it just a TD? It'll boldface, or TH, it'll boldface it and center it, right? Also took my borders off because I don't have borders here, but you know, that's not so bad, is it? Have this top one without any borders on it. Still looks pretty good. So I'll have to make that a design decision. There's my schedule. Title across the top. Looks like it's a title, it's extra text. This is very common. Somebody asked me, how'd you do that? It's a cell. How'd you get it so close to the top of your table? Because this could be done with a paragraph, but then you got to remove margins and stuff so that it squeezes closer to the table. Much easier, just put it inside, hide the borders. All right, what's next? We did that. Now the rest of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows, the first column is one bunch of spanned rows. And yes, you can merge and match and turn these things into spanned rows and columns, and oh boy, I've never done it, but it could be done. So if I wanted for some reason to merge all of this, I could. But I want these to be merged rows, spanned rows. So I need to get to this cell, and that's in the days of the week row. There's my day of the week row. There's the first cell, and I want this to be a row span of 6. Again, if I just stop there, I'm going to have problems. It worked, but here's 6 more cells that are kind of, why do these have, and if you look at it, it's really hard to kind of figure out what's wrong here. Because there's extra cells on the ends of the rows. That means they have more cells in them than they should, than these do. Because I spanned this, I got that. What I have to do is for every cell that I span, I have to remove it. And here, especially when it's a row span, I definitely like to comment them out. Because then that implies to me that it's been spanned. And you could put in here this row span. You can put anything you want. But if I decide to put them back, I have to take all that out. So I'm just going to copy that now into my 10 o'clock, take that row out. 11 o'clock, 12, and 1. That's the way I do it. It helps me keep my table structure, because otherwise I'm looking at this and going, why are there only 6 cells in here? And why isn't this first cell appearing at the top of the table? Because it's not really the first cell. By commenting this out, it tells me there's a cell at the top in the left edge of this, I'm sorry, the left, not the top. There's a cell at the left that I'm not using, or it's been spanned. And this is in the second column. It's not in the first column. And that can really help sometimes. There we go. Now the challenge is, how do I get the time in here? It's rotated vertically. Well, I have to go look up your rotate tags, your rotate styles, and I don't remember them. So there's a couple other ways you could do that. For right now, I'm just going to put a T and a B and an R in that cell. So here's my spanned cell, and I'm going to say T and then a break, and an I and then a break, and an M, until later when I can find the rotation. I'm also going to set the class equal to time column. Create a class for that. In here, I'm going to say that my text align is centered, and my vertical align is middle. Though it probably would be anyway. Let's find out. Yes, it is anyways.
expanded.
Yeah, why? Don't know. Okay. So if I don't want this column expanded, what do? I go to the top most cell, which is right here, okay, and I can set the width of my time column. Doesn't have anything across the top, so let's see what happens if I set the width to 1M. Should have plenty of room for all those letters, right? Including the M in time. Be a very narrow column with a little bit of padding that has to be built in. And notice how all the others now automatically adjust to fill the cell, to fill the table. If you want it to be done, there's probably a way, there's a way to do it without using tables necessarily. But if there's something you want done, it can be done. So now I need the times in here, and those are always in column, or in column 2, which is relatively easy to find because after the first row, it's the first visible column. Looks like I want them right aligned and I want some width. So I called that the time column. What am I going to call this now? I hardly call it time column again. Tell you what, ooh, that would be rude, but we can do this, right? Does that work? This is an example I was talking about before. It doesn't change anything. This is my one and only on this page time column. So I could use it as an ID. And then this is interesting. It'd probably be stupid. Can I create a time column class? Named style? Probably. Don't think it'll get confused. The time column, I want the text aligned to be right aligned, and the width of, we'll have to eyeball this. I want it to be a fixed size. Once I get the sizes, the times to fit in there, I don't want them to stretch and make more room. I want them to be a fixed size. Remember, when you specify column width, it specifies the width maximum that will ever be. So let's start at 200 and I'll work my way down.
Let's just go 5 EM.
Pardon me?
Let's just do 5 EM.
Not bad.
Characters.
Not bad. 5M, because I'm going to have colons and a couple of digits. 5M ought to cover it. But now I have to apply that class to every one of these cells, because this cell is a little different. Doesn't look like an L to me. What's going on? Oh, it's the mouse. Now I have an ID and a class with the same name. Does it work? Yes. I'm not sure how bright it is, but it works. It could be a little confusing. Is that your ID or is that your class name? I probably should just call it times. That means I didn't really need to change that one. And I don't know of any easy way to apply this to an entire column. There are some column commands, but they're not real easy to understand. If that's 5M, it's much wider than I want it to be. So I'm going to go back to my pixel. Let's start at 150 pixels, save it. Whoa, way too big. How about, let's see, what do we need? About a third of that, quarter of that? Let's go with a third of that. Pretty good. Looks pretty similar to my example over here. This example is squished. I think it's because of the padding that I have in here of 10. So I could change that to 5. Shrink the padding down a little bit so my table isn't quite so big, or maybe you like it that way. It's up to you. What's going on up there? Ah, that's why remember I want to put a non-breaking space in? The reason it was working is because I had padding put in. If I hadn't put the padding in, this table would have collapsed down to nothing. So that's why the non-breaking spaces weren't necessary, because I already had a style that says, put a padding in of 5 or 6 or 10 or whatever. Notice what's happening here. Okay? These cells have all of a sudden shrunk. Imagine if I didn't have any padding horizontally and no text, it shrinks down to nothing. And you see this one cell. You're going, what happened to all my rest? This is probably a good plan. Put some padding in to start. 5 seems to be pretty good. Now I want to put those days of the week in. Where's my day of the week row? Here's my days of the week row. The first one is the times column. Why is there an extra one?
Because you put Monday over 9 o'clock.
I put Monday there. Okay, so here I don't want anything. Should be able to, let's just move the other one up. Should be able to just leave it blank. See what happens. Yep. I think those were centered over here. Yep. And everything else is centered. So I can just put that into everybody. Won't go away. I love it when they won't go away. It's just switching windows. So can I center my text in my table? That would take care of the time column. The times are supposed to be right aligned, so this would override it. Let's try moving this into the table. These should stay. This will be fine. Those should center. Now I don't have to specify it for every single cell. I specified it just for those tables. Okay, now the fun starts. I got the boring stuff out of the way, this and this. So there's Excels that go all the way across here at 9 o'clock on Monday. So here's the 9 o'clock and the cells that go across, and Excel went through Thursday. And you can see where the comments can come in handy now. And again, if I haven't taught it to you before, I hope it starts sinking in here. Test, test, test. Type a few things. Test, looks good. Type a few more things. Test, looks good. Type a few more things. It's going to be critical next semester. All right, now underneath Excel at 10 o'clock, I have prep and grading because I don't have any classes there. So that's a 1, 2, 3, 4 row span. Okay, so that's at the 10 o'clock time slot. There's the 10, and the next one is prep and grading, and that spans rows. So that is a row span of 4. So now I got to go find the corresponding ones here. There's the 11 o'clock and comment them out.
What's the shortcut key
To comment, I don't know if there is one in HTML because it has to put tags at the beginning and at the end. So I don't think it's not as easy as in other languages where they can put slashes on it. It's a little harder here. So if there's a shortcut, I haven't found it. Save it and test. Cool. Now what I don't like is that the columns are adjusting on me. I fixed the size of this one, fixed the size of that one. think I want all these to be the same size as well. So I'm going to create one more named style.
Couldn't you just do it in table? Everything else is defined.
Yes, yeah, and the other ones would override that. No, the table width of the table is the width of the table, not the width of the cell, so I have to put it into the cells. Column width is what I'm going to name it and apply it to each one of the first cells in the table, which don't appear until the second row. Okay, so in here, I'm going to say width of 100 pixels. Now I've broken my cardinal rule saying allow one column that stretches. Well, this one, I want all my columns to be the same width. I've already figured out the width for this column and that column. These are all going to be 100 pixels equally. That means that this table will not shrink. Well, it will shrink. It just won't expand after a certain point. It will shrink. So that class needs to be applied to every one of these columns. Not that one. And I could have applied this, you know what, this class times is right aligned. I think this is better applied to the first cell in the column, even though it's blank. And now all of these formatting are going to be applied here, except this one's going to be column width. And yes, you have to do it to each one because what I was just talking about with Justin, you can't apply it to the row or to the table because width means something different. A 100 may not be exactly what I want, but looks like they'll stretch full size here. Is that 100 pixels? Is it getting bigger?
Your 9 o'clock isn't right aligned.
Whoa, how'd that happen?
You took it out.
Because I took it out of here because the times is right aligned. That's just that one cell. Instead of putting it, if I put it here, did I put a times on every one of those cells? Yep. So that was a mistake. It was an interesting idea to get the width up there just once. Now it's right aligned, it's expanding. That means my 50 width is probably still more than I need it to be. Why do they keep shrinking? Notice how this one's wrapped now? Because it can. But that doesn't feel like 100 pixels. It might be. Let's change the width to 50. Looks like that table's still expanding, doesn't it? Did I set the width at 80%?
Isn't that the minimum? Yeah. 50 pixels minimum.
Now it might not center very well because it doesn't have a width. Oh, it's still centering. There's the 50. Because the table width was at a certain percentage, the columns adjusted, which is not what I wanted. So I had to lock them in a little bit.
But by
Take out
doing
the
that,
table width.
It split it evenly between the floor.
It looked like it, but it was also adding more to my times over here, what I didn't want. And by setting, I wanted the maximum width. So I'm going to go back to 100 on that because now that I see it works. That's too many. Now each one of those, that one doesn't fit into 100. That's why it had to grow. Right. Table will not let words wrap. Split words. It'll do things like this. Okay, but it will not let that split. So 100 wasn't enough for Wednesday.
That's just times.
That's why. Let's do the other one. Where'd it go?
No, time column, that's the ID one.
Yeah.
Thank you. There we go. And that looks similar to this. And I'm getting, if I want this wrapping, I can put breaks in there and wrap it myself if I really want it to look that way, but this looks fine. Notice the horizontal alignment.
So just to clarify, what happens if you were to do too small?
I did. Remember, my Wednesday didn't fit.
But you were in the time spot.
It would still do the same thing.
You did like 40.
Because what was it to start with, 50?
Mhm.
Now the Wednesday column is wider than the others because the word will not split. When you resize stuff in HTML, it will not split words for you. It'll split phrases like this, but it will not split words. Right, then the rest of this is pretty much the same kind of stuff. In the interest of time, I think I'm going to stop. I merge a couple of cells, just got to find the right ones. Comment out the one that goes with it. Same thing here, find that one, it's the 1 o'clock row. The Wednesday column is a little tough to find. It's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th column. So let's see if I can find that one. It's the 1 o'clock row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 column. If I didn't have these commented out, finding the 5th column is a lot harder. If you just remove the cells because you don't need them, everything works. But finding things can be a little complicated. It's supposed to be Wednesday? Yep, found it. A little later, I suggest that we get a little crazy and say on Friday, can't tell where that is, but it looks like it's 1, 2, 3 cells up. So that last Friday one for 3 cells, 1, 2, 3. Now I've made a big cell there. Inside the cell, I can do whatever I want. Like create, how would you create this? The way I created this is a little, it took a little playing around, believe me. This is really a table with 1, 2, 3 columns, 1, 2, 3 rows, and then I merged the cells so that I could put those sad faces in there. And then I had to adjust the width of the cells with the sad faces. And getting the sad faces just right so they don't overlap when they're in different cells was really tricky. But this is a table inside of a cell. The cell, think of it as just another, same thing I tell people in Microsoft Word, that a cell is really just a mini document. You can do whatever you want in there. Put pictures in there, put links in there, put tables inside of tables is what Reed was talking about they use for formatting. Oh my God. And then what happens with dynamic sizing in tables inside of tables? Oh. So in here, I can split it and then add a table. That has 3 rows. Each of which has 3 cells. My table style up above should still apply to this, so I should see a table inside a table. Notice because the padding is quite small, actually now it's gone, I got little itty bitty tables. But there's a table inside, and now I can go into each one of those rows and do things like merge the first row. So this one has a row span, column span of 3, which means these 2 are gone. And I can do the same thing for the bottom. Things get tricky when I try to put those faces in there, and I've tried all kinds of different things. What I will do is go find my current solution for it and post it for you so that you can see it. But you can do anything in there that you want. Now I have this column span, and it's the chores column. And it should be centered because my table style says it's centered. And all those chores that you see in here, that bulleted list, are all in that cell right there.
Is it? If your table inside that table gets bigger, the cell adjusts, I'm assuming, oh, it already did.
There's a limit because I said that column width of Friday is 100. So there's a limit to the size of that table. It will grow till it fills that, and I think at that point it starts choking, and I might have to make Friday bigger to make the list of chores fit in there, but I'll post my finished product. Questions about tables? You know that Wednesday's class is not meeting, though that's your lab time. Like I said, for iOS, it'd probably be a good idea for you all to get your heads together and try some of this stuff. There's a tables assignment, forces you to put a table into your document with merging and all that kind of stuff. The next Monday, we'll start on forms, which is, I think, one of the most important things we're going to talk about in here is how do we create forms. See you then.